Hello Year 5 and welcome to your geography lesson for this week. So we're going to carry on looking at our mountains topic and we're going to be looking at what the climate is like around mountainous areas. Okay, so we've looked at climate before when we did our North America topic. So we're going to be thinking about the weather, what the weather's going to be like at different points as you make your way through a mountain range. So mountains have their own climates, okay? And the reason why they've got their own climates is because of their high altitude. Now, altitude is that distance away from the base of the mountain as you work your way up. So the altitude is the height that mountain goes into the sky. Now, because they're so far up into the sky, obviously as we work our way up, it gets colder and colder. So even mountains that are in warm countries, so countries that lie along the equator, they themselves will still have snow on the top of their peaks because the higher up the mountain you go, obviously the colder that climate becomes, those temperatures drop. And when those temperatures drop, that allows for snow to be able to settle and stay. Now, mountains also tend to be wetter than flat areas, and that's because they're that far up in the mountain. They're a lot closer to the sky and to the clouds. So as that water condenses as it works its way up, it then freezes. But obviously, when it then gets warmer and those snow caps get smaller, obviously it melts a lot more. But because of the colder temperatures, it's very unlikely that anything's going to be dry because of how far up into the sky they are. Now, if you have a look at these mountains here, you can see at the bottom of the mountains, there's no snow. Okay, but this is what we call snow-capped mountains. It's almost like they've got a cap or a hat of snow that sits on the top. And this is because obviously that altitude has got higher and higher. And as a result, that temperature has got colder and colder. And that means that only on those peaks, so those top parts of the mountains, is it cold enough for that snow to have settled. And obviously, as you work your way further down the mountain, okay, that altitude drops because we're no longer high up into the sky, and therefore we have the warmer temperatures. So that's what happens when we say that it's snow-capped. It's almost like wearing its hat of snow, and that's because of the altitude of how high into the sky it is. Now, one thing that's also important to remember is that climate also affects the type of animals and plants that might live there, okay? So obviously at the foot of the mountain, we're going to have lots of the climate-dependent vegetation, so all the plants, the bushes, the trees, and obviously you're going to have all your legged animals that are going to be around on the base of the mountain. Because there's no snow, it's warmer, there's going to be a lot more vegetation, so food, more plants, and that includes us being able to farm. Okay, so if you think of Mount Vesuvius, when we looked at our volcanoes from last week, Mount Vesuvius actually has very fertile earth because that ash has fertilized the ground, which makes it a perfect place to grow crops. And that's the same thing at the bottom of mountains. If you've got that rich vegetation, that rich soil, you're able to grow crops, you're able to grow trees, bushes, and obviously that also provides for food for the animals that are there as well. So at the foot of the mountain, these plants and animals that live there only depend on what the climate of the country is like. So as you go further up the mountain, obviously we know that gets colder. Okay, that's when we have needle leaf trees. Now, needle leaf trees can grow quite tall and quite big, but only up until a certain point where we get up the mountain, and it stops at what we call the tree line. Okay, so you'll see a specific, almost exactly a line of trees, the type of trees of the needle leaf trees, when they actually stop. And that's because they actually cannot withstand the climate of that part of the mountain. So this is when you've got your animals and your plants that have had to adapt to that colder temperature to be able to survive. So the alpine trees, okay, which then go beyond that tree line, they're trees that can actually withstand those harsh conditions, so they can grow. And they tend to be very big, very thick, heavy trees. And they tend to be quite densely populated in areas, almost like forests. And they can withstand that very, very cold temperature. But obviously, by the time we get to the peak of the mountains, we're talking right up onto the peak, onto the summit. At that point in time, it's practically rock and ice because of how far it up is in terms of its altitude. Not very much is going to be able to grow at the top of the mountain. And as a result, not very many animals are going to be able to live or survive that point either. So because it's only the rock and the ice, okay, that altitude actually makes it too difficult to support any form of life. And that's why when you work your way further up mountains, you find there's very little life to be able to be seen. So let's think of this in terms of Mount Everest. And we know that Mount Everest is the world's tallest mountain. It's the world's highest mountain. And the climate that is associated with that mountain is extreme, okay? There have been plenty of people that have died climbing this mountain, and that's just to do with the altitude sickness from the freeze burn, from the frostbite, from the hypothermia, and a lot of that is down to the temperature and the percentage of oxygen as that altitude gets higher and higher. Now, the average temperature at the summit's the very, very top, is minus 37 degrees. Minus 37. Now, that's the average temperature. So, on average, you would expect it to be around 37, but there are times where it will peak and it will get higher, and it might get a little bit lower as well. But if we look at the temperatures recorded over 12 months, and we found the average temperature, we're talking around minus 37. But it can reach as far down as minus 60 degrees. Now you think how cold that is, and you think that there are people that have managed to climb right to the top of Mount Everest more than once and have managed to withstand and survive potentially minus 60 degrees. I mean, that's pretty incredible. Now, from June to September, Mount Everest, believe it or not, experiences what's known as the Indian monsoon. We associate monsoon with rain, and it's usually heavy rain, and it's an ongoing fluctuation of rain. And then when you say people go on holiday, specifically when people go on holiday to countries near the equator, they think, oh, we'll go and have a nice, lovely summer holiday in July. And what they don't realise is that around those summer peaks is when actually a lot of those countries along the equator have a monsoon season, and it's just torrential rain for weeks and weeks and weeks that just doesn't stop. And that's because of the temperature change. So here it has the Indian monsoon season, and this is when the wind and the rain is then blown in from the Indian Ocean. So usually during those periods of time from June to September, it's actually quite dangerous for climbers to be able to climb up Mount Everest because it makes the weather unpredictable. We don't know what that wind's going to do. We don't know how dangerous the rain's going to be, and actually makes it very difficult for climbers because they're often experience what's known as violent snowstorms. And I'm sure you can only imagine how serious it is if you were to get caught in a snowstorm. So those really strong winds and really strong snow, and you add that altitude sickness of breathing in, near enough pure oxygen, as well as it getting as close to up to minus 37 degrees, it's going to be a really big struggle, okay? Now, we're going to have a look at some climate data, okay, on the next slide. So we're going to look at how the temperature fluctuation changes. So there is a part as you get just beyond halfway up Mount Everest, which is called base camp. And this is where people make their way up. They tend to be with guides, or they go up groups of people and they train. And up there, what will happen... Oh, sorry, I switched sides. That's where people then to camp out, and there's emergency kits, there's tents, there's people there, and that's where people then begin their climb from Mount Everest. But even though it's only base camp, and obviously it's not right to the summit, we're still talking 17,600 feet up this mountain. I mean, there's only another maybe 10,000 feet left to go. So we're almost 2/3 up this mountain. Now, if we have a look at the temperatures, this is for you a bar chart, and we've done bar charts in maths before, but this is what is called an upside down bar chart because we're looking at minus temperatures here, so we're talking negative numbers. So we've started with our base temperature of 0 degrees and actually working our way backwards down from our minus numbers. So here you can see as we work away from January, February to March, we're starting off somewhere around minus 16, 17 degrees. Okay, that temperature then starts to get warmer as we work our way up from May, June, July, and then we hit July and August, and we're talking somewhere around 3 degrees, minus 3 degrees. Now you imagine when it was the coldest day last week when we had the snow, we're talking maybe just slightly colder than that, because I think on even those days that we only experienced about -1, -2. So that was roughly the temperature it is at base camp. Now that sounds okay. That doesn't sound too bad in the summer. But then as we start moving back through into our autumn and our winter months, we're starting to come all the way back down to hitting our minus 15 degrees temperatures, okay? So I'm going to ask you to see if you can work out the answers to these questions. So I want to pause the video and see if you can answer what is the coldest month, what is the hottest month, and how do you think the climate will be different at the summit? So pause the video and jot down your answers to those 3 questions. Okay, so the coldest months, we're looking at the temperature that's got the biggest minus degrees, and we can see here that's going to be January. Okay, so January is the coldest point as you hit base camp for Mount Everest. We can see that the hottest months, okay, is actually July and August. They both peak at the same temperature of around -3 degrees. Now, let's go back to what I said before, and that we're only at base camp. So we're only 2/3 of the way up Mount Everest. When I said in the previous slides, we know that altitude gets higher and higher, the temperatures get colder and colder. So if we're thinking about the climate near here now, only 2/3 up this mountain, I can almost assume and assuredly say that by the time we hit the summit of Mount Everest, we're talking potentially temperatures that might have doubled that, because we know that it could hit as high, or as low rather, as -37. We've only hit around -16, 17 here. Okay, so I think it's going to get even colder. So let's have a look. So this bar chart shows the average temperature at the summit, which is 29,000 feet. So this is an extra 15,000 feet. So the base camp was only just over 2/3 up the mountain. We still had almost half of that, nearly another third of that to go. Now we can see here if we work our way along. So let's have a look at this one. So what is the coldest month? So if we have a look at our temperatures down the side here, we've got up to -40. We can see here that January is pretty cold. Now that temperature doesn't change very much up until April. We're talking maybe, 37, 36 degrees, -37, 36 degrees there. And we're talking -30 here. There's only almost a 6-degree difference in the space of 4 months. So that winter period there moving into our spring is really quite chilly up on the summit. We then get slightly warmer temperatures as we work our way through spring. And then by the time we hit our summer months of June, July and August, it is warmer than any other month here as we hit July. So the hottest month here is definitely July. But we're still talking about -18 degrees. Now, if you compare that to the -3 degrees at base camp, which is our standard winter for us here in Birmingham, we're now talking up to -17 degrees. So it's a lot colder, even in the hottest month of the year. And then you can see as we work our way through to the autumn months into our winter month, it rapidly drops quite quickly. I mean, by the time we've gone from July to October in 3 months, we've dropped from about -17 to pushing nearly -13 degrees. So there's quite a rapid drop in that temperature. And by the time we hit December, we're on roughly around 34, -35 degrees until we go back to January when it's then even colder. So the coldest months there we can see, okay, is actually January, February time, so the start of the year. That hottest temperature gets all the way up to the middle. Now we can see here the difference in the summit of Mount Everest and the base camp, in that although July was still the warmest at base camp, it's still the warmest when we hit the summit. The average temperature changes of nearly -15 degrees. So there's a big difference in that change in temperature, okay? Now, which do you think will be the wettest months on Mount Everest? Can you remember? Okay, so the wettest months are going to be these ones here. So we're talking from August, September and October. But obviously this is where between June, July and August, if we look from our previous slide, this is when we get the Indian monsoon. Okay, so that's actually around the summertime. And that is because of that temperature change. So although we know it's a lot warmer, that temperature change coming in from the Indian Ocean actually stirs up that storm. So it actually gets quite dangerous. So here we can see the average rainfall here. And actually, just like we said, going back from our Indian monsoon, we can see here that the rainfall hits up to here, sort of 18. Okay, so the number of days of rainfall in Mount Everest, by the time we get to July and August, it's raining for up to nearly 20 days in that entire month. That's a long time for it to be raining, okay? Now, my question is, why do you think there's no rain here for these 4 months? Okay, it could be that because we've got the temperature drops and we don't have the monsoon season, it's actually quite dry because the mountain actually peaks beyond the cloud level. So actually it doesn't really get much of the rain. And you can clearly spot here that our monsoon season, like we said, that goes from June to August here, we really peak with our rain all the way up here in July and August. So although we consider that as summer, that's actually the worst and most dangerous time of the year to actually be climbing Mount Everest. So your task that you're going to do, I'm going to move me just so I don't cover up all the writing. Okay. Oh, you have an option. Okay. You can have a go. So I've got all the details here for Mount Fiji. Okay, so this is going to be for those of you that need to have the more challenging questions so you know who you are. By all means, have a go. For those of you that think that you need an additional challenge as well, I want you to have a go at drawing a bar chart or a line chart to plot this data. Now, we've done our line charts before when we've done our line graphs, but you might need 3 different colours to be able to plot them, and then remember, join them together. And then the other one is a slightly easier activity where you have to find your answers on Google, okay? Is you can type in these questions, and I want you to see if you can find what the average temperature is for certain months of the highest mountains in the world, okay? So it's up to you which one you want to choose. Have a go, okay, and see how you get on. Okay, good luck, year 5.